is one theme from Oppenheimer that absolutely blew up, becoming one of the most recognizable themes of the year. And when I first heard it, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what was going on in this theme. But it turns out I was completely wrong. And what actually is going on blew my mind even more. Beautiful. Whoa. Yeah, and this is where I thought I had it figured out right here. I was like, oh, I get what's going on here. Ooh. Okay, so when I tell you that this theme by Ludwig Göransson is one of the craziest things that I have heard in a long time, I am not joking, but we have to dig under the surface a little bit to actually figure out what's going on. First, I want to just look at the melodic content that's going on here in the violins, because it's incredibly beautiful, it's a really interesting theme, and it's doing some really interesting things harmonically. The theme consists of two parts. There's an ascending part and then a descending part. The ascending part looks like this. We have these figures of 6 eighth notes at a time. We have an ascending line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes up, and then a note down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. This continues on through the entire ascending line. But in terms of shape of these lines, like, it's not like if I had just like one chord shape and was moving that up, like if I went that would make a lot more sense in terms of being a pattern. Downward motion, we have that's deceivingly hard to play, and again, that's because it's not just following a pattern like that would be. Starting from the top, we go down for 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then up 1, and that leads us to our next thing. It gets so confusing. There we go. And then eventually it brings us back into the next time up, right? So that's what's going on in terms of the notes. Now, harmonically, this is where things start to get really interesting, because when we listen to what's going on here, we hear some cool stuff. Yeah. Woo! Check this out. Okay, so we now have sort of our harmony, and what's really cool about this up-down sequence is that we don't have to change anything for the harmony to work no matter what we do in the bass, right? Let's check it out. When we have our first introduction of a chord, right? Because so far all we've done is we've really just played this line up and then played it down. When I first heard this, I simply thought that it was this scale. Just like that, right? And depending on what you put in the bass, that scale can take on a number of different meanings or functions, right? Now we're almost doing that exact thing, except there's one note that we don't use at all, and that's A. You will not find A in this line at all. So it's like, imagine that same scale I just talked about, right? If we took those notes, but just take the A out of it, we get this. While we're playing these notes, we can do a bunch of different things in the bass, and that's exactly what we hear. The first thing we hear is this beautiful C major outline. All the notes that we play in our violin line, they're all from the C Lydian scale, which is C major. But again, instead of F, which we know we don't have anywhere in this theme, we use an F sharp. It's that beautiful chord, that C major 7 sharp 11 chord. Well, what do we know is definitely going to work with C major 7 sharp 11? It's the relative minor. If we just simply move our root note down a minor third to its relative minor of A, we know that all this same stuff is going to work exactly the same. It sounds very, very similar, just darker, of course, because we've changed our root note from something that's a major sound to a minor sound, but all the notes stay exactly the same. That's why we call it the relative minor. Then of course we have our root, or what feels like the home base of this whole thing, and that's E minor. When we hear that, we're usually hearing the downward motion. That grouping of notes, which is exactly the same as what we've been doing this whole time, now we have an E minor below it. So those three sounds, we don't need to change our notes at all. We can just use this same bank of notes that we've written this ascending and descending pattern with, and we can just change up with the root note. C major 7 sharp 11, A minor 7, right? Which is more like I guess like an A minor 11 maybe? And then E minor is our root. E natural minor is exactly the same notes as C Lydian, is exactly the same notes as A Dorian. Those three different scales with three different roots use the exact same note bank. It's the same sound, which is why we can play this ascending descending pattern in the violins, and no matter what we do with the bass line, whether we're playing the C, the A, or the E, it sounds beautiful. And it's a fantastic way to develop the intensity of the sequence too. Yeah. C major, E minor, A minor, whoop. Whoa, okay, so we have something else going on here. What is that? Is that a D major? It is, yeah, it's D major. Ha! I didn't even realize that. D major here, and what do we know? The exact same note bank still works, except it changes the actual function of the chord. Back to our C major. D major. C major. D major, E minor, D over F sharp, C major, D, E minor. Ooh. Wow. Okay, so this whole time we're playing with these chords that work with that note bank. Finally, after all of this tension building, we let it resolve on G major. And that's where it ends. What a brilliant composition. But we haven't even gotten to the part that blew my mind the most. So let's talk about that. Obviously, the most striking part of this theme is what happens rhythmically and how the tempo changes throughout. There's a steady buildup of speed. It gets faster and faster and faster and starts introducing more layers, introducing more instrumentation that kind of just keeps building up this emotional tension point that eventually resolves. But it kind of almost doesn't even resolve because it just kind of cuts off, right? This is where I thought I had this thing figured out. When I first heard this, I was like, oh, I get what he's doing here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. When I first heard that, I'm like, oh, I get it. It's some type of metric modulation. A metric modulation is a change in pulse or tempo that is derived by a rhythmic grouping of the previous tempo. Now, that sounds complicated, but stick with me for a second. Let's take a regular 4/4 drum beat. Now we can subdivide this in a number of ways. We can subdivide it into eighth notes. We can subdivide it into 16th notes. Or we can start to introduce dotted notes to make our subdivisions even more interesting and add a little bit of syncopation. How about some dotted eighth notes? What if we took that dotted eighth note pattern and made it the new quarter note? It's super trippy, but it sounds like this. That's an example of metric modulation. Okay, well, that would be the perfect explanation if that's what was going on here, but it's not. And when I found out how they did this, I was absolutely blown away. I could not fathom how difficult this must have been to do, because the tempo changes are kind of random. They just seemingly feel quicker over time, except they don't just steadily get faster. They accelerate a little bit and then pull back for the ascending pattern. This whole time, we're just building the tempo more and more and more. And so I'm starting to think about this and I'm going, wait a second, how do they do this? Because there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's not like you're taking a mathematical subdivision of the previous tempo and making that the new tempo like you would if it was a metric modulation. No, these are just a new tempo. Well, Ludwig Göransson tells us how he did this in this interview, and it is nuts. Check this out. I was going to record 4 bars, 4 bars, 4 bars, and then digitally mash it all together because I didn't think it was playable. But when we started recording it with these incredible musicians, we came up with a way to give the musicians the new tempo before the tempo changed. Ready for this? So when they were playing in one tempo, 2 bars before the tempo changed, they got the new tempo in their clicks. I want you just to think about that for a second, because this is already super complicated. Like we said, it's not a simple ascending pattern that would be easy to replicate quickly. Same with the descending. It doesn't have that same ease. It's a little more difficult, as I learned when I sat here for 15 minutes trying to play this thing correctly. So not only do you have to become completely proficient with the line itself, but then while you're playing it at a certain tempo, in your ear, you're gonna get a new tempo. You almost have to ignore what you're playing, put it on autopilot, listen to the new tempo, and then be ready to fall right into it. It is crazy. Check this out. Now, to demonstrate this, I've created a few different examples. One is just a recreation of the string line. Now, we don't know exactly how they put together a click for the musicians to use while they were recording, but an example of what that might sound like would be this. Now, this is the insane part. When you consider these tempo changes, and you have to say, all right, well, we need to let the musicians know what the new tempo is right before we get there. Well, kind of the only way to do it is to overlay that new tempo. So this is what it would sound like if you were counting normally up until you were 2 bars out from the start of the new tempo, and you got the click for the new tempo over top of what you're already playing in the old tempo. I don't know, how does the person even do that? Okay, so we've established that this is one of the craziest themes that I've heard in a long time for so many reasons. I mean, it's incredibly well written. It makes great use of simple diatonic harmony to build tension, and then the whole tempo change thing. I just could not wrap my head around this when I heard it for the first time. I thought I had it figured out. I thought it was mathematically derived, but it's not. And the fact that it's not just made it that much harder. Absolutely unbelievable job by all of the musicians that worked on this score, and an incredible job by Ludwig Göransson for putting such an incredible theme together. And I want to make the announcement here that it is now November, which means Black Friday is only a few weeks away. We're going to talk more about it soon, but if you are curious as to what the massive deal that we're going to be running for Black Friday is, and if you want to sign up to get a notification when that sale goes live, there's a link down in the description. You can find out more. But until then, go watch Oppenheimer, because wow. I was blown away by this. I was blown away by the film. But as always, I want to know your thoughts in the comments down below. What did you think of the film? What did you think of Ludwig Göransson's score? And where does it rank for you among scores from films that came out this year? Because we very well might have an Oscar contender on our hands. I would kind of be surprised if it doesn't win. But anyways, that's gonna be all for me today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.